Look at the pieces. Come on, come on.
When I was 22 when I went to Iraq, and we had this very naive idea that if we lived amongst the people and not in the green zone, that we would be safe. So we lived in a Christian area. We had 7 different translators who lived with us, one from each of the different sects within Iraqi society. So Christians, Yazidis, Kurds, Shia, Sunni, somebody who was friends with Saddam Hussein, somebody who hated Saddam Hussein, etc., etc. And so we were here living far away from the green zone, and the only place that we knew that was safe nearby was the United Nations.
Yeah, it's a moment.
Yeah, there are going to be other journalists there. Come on.
Let's go. If it's a utility, then it's just another story. But if it's something, or if it's an American soldier, it's just another American soldier, unfortunately. If it's something else, then it's something else. And it's just that.
Ooh, UN! UN!
It's not fucking the UN! It's the UN! I think you have to walk around and get there. I'm sure how close. Let's go around the outside. Oh, this is really strong. I really didn't know what I was doing, and at that time we thought the best thing was to just make friends with everyone and everything would be okay. And then when that bomb went off in our safe zone, our only safe zone, that's when for us the reality hit, and there was nowhere safe left in Iraq for us anymore. I left about 6 months later after I was almost kidnapped from Iraq, and in that time I think I had my life saved 3 times by my translator. And I tried to get myself killed several times by running towards bombs rather than away from them, which is what I was doing just there. I joined Al Jazeera English in 2007 and set up the Baghdad bureau there. And ever since then I've been meeting lots of people doing amazing things who are just everyday people like yourselves who, when things go wrong, find themselves to be remarkable under the most extraordinary of circumstances. In 2010, there was the war in Gaza, and my friend went off to Gaza, and as she was leaving, and she'd never been to a war zone, she'd never seen a bomb, as she was leaving, she said, "Rosie, what is it again with the CPR? Is it 2 breaths and 10 pumps, or vice versa?" And I said, "Oh my God, how can you not know this?" And I realized, I went online and tried to find a book that would be suitable for somebody like me or an NGO, and there was nothing out there. So I sat down and spent 5-6 months talking to 150 people who, everyone from a Somali pirate to an Afghan army captain, and tried to put all of that information into this book. And the book is largely my mistakes and their information, because they know what they're doing. I still don't know what I'm doing. I've been arrested twice in the last 4 months. But anyway, based on all of this, I've put together this top 10 tips that I think hopefully should be helpful for you, and then we'll have some questions afterwards. Obviously this just skates the top, but you're welcome to ask me anything afterwards. First tip is be prepared. It might seem very romantic to go into a country with your eyes open and no preconceptions, and for sure you're going to have all your preconceptions changed when you get there. But there is no harm in calling up your, for instance, if you're going to South Africa, call up your hotel and say, okay, so just tell me, how do I get from the airport to you safely? What's the best way? Because things can really go wrong in South Africa quickly if you stop at the wrong stoplight, or you've got your bag in the wrong place in the car. And there are some really basic things that you can learn this way. Also start making friends with these people before you get there, and then they've got an interest in looking after you if something goes wrong. Give them your number. It's going to take you 3 days to get to Timbuktu to go to a festival, a music festival, like I did in Mali. Give the hotel your number and your details and your journey, so that if you're a day late for some reason, they actually care and want to follow up. They may care only because you're going to pay them, but that doesn't matter, at least they care. Listen to the locals. This is where I went so wrong for so many years, and I've really learned differently now. I can give you one example where, so the reason to listen to the locals is that they are the ones left behind, they are the ones who've been there, and as much as you may think that your nationality, or your colour, or your height sets you apart, it also could be a point of danger. And also may leave the locals vulnerable later. So for instance, in Iraq, I know it's not a very good example for every day, but all of the translators that we worked with were in a lot of danger when we left, and we had to do everything we could to protect them. And if for some reason you're caught in the middle of a political situation, you should be aware of this. I tend to focus, when I'm choosing somebody to work with abroad, I tend to focus these days on people with families and children, because they tend to make the most sensible decisions, whereas I can be not very sensible sometimes. When I first started, I would focus on very large men, because they sort of acted as a double. They were like a bodyguard and a translator at the same time. So once I was in a car with a man who had 8 children, who was my translator, and we were heading towards an interview that I desperately wanted to do at a crossroads in Iraq. And there was only one way to get to the interview, and that was through this crossroads. And there had been riots all over Basra that day. But we'd been to riots before, we'd been fine, we'd done a couple of great pieces from the riots before. That day, he said to me, you know, Rosie, I have a very bad feeling about this, I think we shouldn't go. And I said, oh, come on, let's go, be brave, let's get in the car. So I got in the car with him, the father of 8 children, and another guy who was working with me at the time who had 2 children. And we headed off. We saw the flames, we saw the guns in the air, and I said, no, come on, let's just go faster. Just go faster through it, it'll be fine. And going against my judgment, he stopped at the side of the road and tried to speak to a man who was waving us down. And the man, I wound down my window, and the man, boom, put his hand, and he had 2 grenades in his hand, and he was saying, British, British to me. And I was saying, Swedish, Swedish, anything but British. We kicked open the door, and luckily he didn't drop the grenades in the car, and quickly turned around. But had I listened to my father of 8 children from the beginning, I wouldn't have been in that situation. Always carry a grab bag. You can buy a nice bag from up there. Most of this stuff is available around the store. But a grab bag is something that everyone should have on every holiday, and I make everyone I travel with have this. A grab bag would have your passport and a copy of your passport held separately elsewhere. Your phone and a charger. I don't know how many times I've run out of charge. These days you can have those great kits that you can plug in that will hold the charge for a long time. Or even get one of those backpacks with a charger on it. Those are pretty good too, although a bit slow and not much use in the middle of winter. A pocket knife, you just have to be careful not to put this into your hand luggage when you're travelling these days, because it will get taken off you at the airport. But a pocket knife is brilliantly useful for mainly feeding yourself. If you find anything like an apple and you've got no access to clean water, then a pocket knife will enable you to eat it, peel it and eat it, and you've got something there right away. And it comes in use with vending cars and all sorts of things. Airline tickets. In most of Africa and parts of Asia, you can actually use airline tickets as cash. If you run out, if you've got a physical ticket, they will exchange it for money for you in many places. So it's well worth keeping that on you. Plus, cash. If you're in a really dangerous place, I would have about 1,000. I often say to put perhaps 250 in one shoe, 250 in another shoe, and then 1,000 in the back, 500 in the back pocket, and another 500 in your front pocket, or whatever you need to spread it all out. But keep it in lots of separate places, and keep plenty of it in local money as well, so that you can give quick tips, and you don't have to bring out your thousands of dollars each time. Credit cards are still, again, you can, in many places, they'll give you credit. Funnily enough, in more of the old-fashioned places, there'll be more, they believe in credit cards more than we do in Germany and England. They'll really give you something for your credit card. Water, always at least a litre of water, and food like granola bars, which in emergencies you can hand out as bribes as well. I always find that Haribo sweets go down very well in many places, and plus they don't go off and they don't melt. They're brilliant. A torch, the more computers and phones and televisions there are in the world, the less electricity there is, and the more blackouts there are. There are more blackouts in Kathmandu today than there were 20 years ago. A torch is very necessary in many of these places. Medical kit, there's a full rundown in the book of all of the bits and bobs that you should get. Some of them very practical and accessible, and others a little bit more difficult. But it explains the sort of top 10 of what you should have in your medical kit. Highly recommend putting it in the back of your car, let alone when you go traveling. And matches and a lighter, not only for fires, unless you try and build your own fire this way, as the man was describing before. But also, I find that for making friends, lighting a cigarette in many parts of the world is a really great opener. Since I don't really enjoy drinking beer that much, which is the other way, it helps out. And I don't smoke myself. Cigarettes is really good as well, by the way, as an opener for conversation. Never go into a crowd without knowing how you're going to get out. This is very, very relevant today in the Middle East, where it's been highly politicized and there are many more riots than there's ever been before. But other countries like Bangkok, a riot might come out of nowhere. Or you might even be at a music festival, or the running of the bulls this year. You may have seen that there's been record numbers of people killed. A really great tip, the day before, if you know where you're going to go to a festival or an event, go along, have a look at a restaurant or two in the area, or knock on a couple of doors of houses and say, listen, if it goes wrong, can I come in? And that way, when it goes wrong, they see a face that they remember, and you've got somewhere to escape to that day. Just avoid T-junctions and dead ends as well. Always stand out on a crossroad, is my advice. Learn a verse of the Quran. Now, when I wrote this book in 2010, it wasn't quite as relevant, but these days it's very, very relevant, and there are numerous documented cases of people getting out of trouble by learning a verse of the Quran. I actually don't know a verse of the Quran, but I do speak partly a little bit of Arabic, so I'm okay. And I have things like some actually Catholic beads that actually double up as looking at Buddhist beads, or Hindu beads, or Muslim beads if you need them. You're supposed to have 99 in the Muslim world, just to give you some advice on how many beads to have. But it's very, has proven very useful. Also a good point of conversation. You know, worth learning a little bit about the. I tend to find that talking about today's politics and news, obviously it can be troublesome, but you can often, if you go back 200 years, begin a conversation about history. And that sometimes is a better, if you're in a contentious situation where you find that people are being aggressive towards you, finding a point of joint history that you can both look to, like the time when you were both persecuted by the Brits, that goes down really well. Obviously not from me, but maybe from someone else. The Brits have been nasty to everybody, so there's always a commonality there. But try before you go to a place to learn some of the ancient history before you learn the modern history, because it's a much more effective way into people's hearts and minds. Don't carry a gun. This in Germany is not too difficult to persuade people, but in America they go, why? My God, why wouldn't you carry a gun? I also don't really believe in bodyguards. I tend to go very lo-fi. I don't like armoured cars that much, but some people I work with insist on it. In the old days, or even today, Fox carries guns to some places, Fox News, and I refuse to work with them as a result, because the moment it escalates very rapidly, and I don't think that journalists, as good looking as they might be, are, great with a gun. It's not what they're trained for. It's not the best idea. And in terms of non-journalists, I should just say, leave it to the experts, and rather give yourself the chance to run away than to engage. This is really important, and people always forget it, but forget the fact that the worst might happen and you may end up dead, which would be awful. There are numerous instances when it would have been useful to leave a few of your computer passwords, your bank details, and a couple of copies of your passport and ID with somebody back home. You could get sick, you could lose all of your stuff, you could have everything stolen. I highly recommend literally going back this afternoon, finding 2 people that you could give all of that stuff in a little envelope, and letting anyone that you're travelling with in the future know that those are the 2 people that you can call on for computer passwords, any emergencies. If I get knocked on the head and fall off a mountain, they'll be able to help. Your insurance details, all of these things are really useful. People are very afraid, they think it's fatalistic to think about these things, but actually you shouldn't. It's very helpful. So I was just talking about running away rather than firing a gun. When I was at school, we did many self-defense classes, and I have subsequently learned that really that's the worst thing of all, to try and engage. You're never going to win. The only way to win is through surprise in most instances, and even in the British, in the SAS, they teach to run rather than engage. It's the first lesson that they learn. They set young men up in a situation, say, okay, what do you do now? And 50% of them go, right, well, I would go like this, at which point they get knocked over because there's no surprise. Whereas the ones who run away, get away, no problems. If you're running away from an animal, run in a zigzag and throw off any clothes that you can, because it will make them stop and smell the clothes. This is mainly for women, but it works very well. I would wear a false wedding ring. I personally always have a ring on me, so I just whack it on when I'm getting off the plane in most instances. I find that taxi drivers in airports tend to be quite misty. Although my mother wishes that I would not do that because she thinks it stops people from talking to me, it works very well, and I often use it. I suppose for men it's probably a good thing as well. Perhaps women should insist that men do wear a wedding ring when they go away. That would be maybe another thing that could be useful. But yeah, it is a deterrent of some sort. So talk a lot about your big boyfriend or husband that's waiting in the hotel for you if you're at all concerned. Last but not least, every single person that I wrote to in the 150 that I spoke to, many of whom consider themselves very important, and certainly too important to wear a seatbelt, all said that the biggest killer in every single instance, whether you're on holiday or in a dangerous place, is car accidents. And wearing a seatbelt will reduce fatalities by around 70%. There are many different statistics on this, but it seems to be around 70%. So it's number 10 here, but it actually should be number 1, 2, 3, and 4 probably. So just be careful when you're driving in. Pick your driver sensibly. I'm covered in scars from picking the wrong driver once, and I broke my back, and I very much regret picking him for his t-shirt that was quite cool, rather than his driving license, which he didn't have. So that is my top 10, and are there any questions?